Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. My friends, the Democratic Party is in deep, deep trouble. And I will explain what I mean in a moment. But if you want to support my work, if you're interested in making sure my work can continue, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, comment on this video, give me your thoughts. I always appreciate hearing the thoughts of my listeners, of my detractors and my supporters. It helps me become a better thinker and a better analyst, so I can give you guys the best possible perspective that I can muster up in my own power. Now onto the video. My friends, there has been talks of midterm doom for the Democrats. And whenever someone says the Democrats are in trouble, this is the focal point of their analysis, that the Democrats are going to have a hard time in the midterm elections compared to the prospects of the Republican Party in those same elections. Therefore, they're doomed. But my friends, I think that people who hold on to this perspective are missing the forest for the trees. Indeed, the trees in this situation would be the fact that by Joe Biden's approval rating just dropped to 33%, one of the lowest of any president ever. There is high inflation. The gas prices are high. Supply chains are disrupted. There are so many things going on that are occurring, incidentally, under a Democratic-controlled government, a Democratic White House and Congress. And therefore, people will make the association, and that's why they're doomed. But my friends, that's not why the Democrats are doomed. Or at least if it is, it's not the full story. That's the trees. But what is the forest? The forest, my friends, is the fact that the Democratic Party is having to blow up its own foundational principles to be able to address the current crises, which puts into question the viability, both the logical and the moral viability of those ideas in the first place. What do I mean? My friends, before I get into that, let me just say something. Elections are not the best way to test the long-standing viability of a principle, because elections, my friends, are temporal and they are reoccurring. Elections happen every year, every 2 years, every 4 years, depending on which election you're looking at, whether it be president, Congress, your local school board, or whatever. Elections are generally reoccurring. Where there is an election today, there shall be one tomorrow. There's nothing special about an election. The only things that elections are simply a offshoot of the sort of pseudo-democratic idea that if someone is elected into a place, or if someone has the most amount of approval, they are therefore viable for public office. And of course, this is not true. This is one of the reasons why I sincerely question democracy, because just because a lot of people like you does not mean your ideas are good, does not mean your values are good, but unfortunately elections are conflated with that. And people who cling to elections are people who are fundamentally strategists. They are not ethicists. They are not people who actually care about if politics and good governance is being achieved. They are people who care about if their team is winning. And people who care about if their team are winning are not people who have the ability, or who are exercising their ability, rather, to analyze if a situation is going to be good for ethics and politics, if a situation is going to be good for the preservation of the American ethos. They are only capable of exercising their judgment towards their team. And that narrow-mindedness is a misuse of one's faculties. If you are narrow-minded in the sense that you think that if a Republican wins, everything is going to be all right, or if a Democrat wins, everything's going to be all right, then I suggest that you use your human mind to the most extent that you possibly can, because in that instance, you're not. But there is a way to test the long-standing viability of certain principles. How do those principles manifest and hold up under crisis? Because as I mentioned, my friends, we have a supply chain shortage. We have inflation at record highs historically. We have a president whose approval rating is at 33% low, and most presidents don't even get down there unless they're incredibly unpopular. You have people who are now getting frightened about food insecurity. You have a lot of different factors that are coming together and are conspiring to create a political crisis. And Democrats, in the attempt to address this matter, have defaulted to principles that are contrary to their own generally. Senator Kelly of Arizona, for example, has suggested to fight inflation that we have a gas tax holiday, which will basically exempt companies from the gas tax for a certain period of time, so that extra cost does not factor into their price. And yet, we understand that Democrats generally support interventionist economics. And interventionist economics and taxation is simply an outgrowth of interventionist economics. Now, there may be some who say, well, Senator Kelly is from a swing state. Therefore, his approach of a gas tax holiday is not reflective of core progressive ideology. Okay, then why is Joe Biden, a few days ago he said in Iowa that he is also going to waive an EPA regulation that bans a certain form of blended ethanol. He's going to waive it for the summer, and this this sort of waiving of this regulation is expected to make the cost of gasoline go down 10 cents a gallon at 2,300 gas stations in the country. This is NBC News. Once again, non-interventionist economics, laissez-faire attitude towards certain issues. Because, again, things are starting to crack, prices are going high, supply chains are disrupted. The point is this, my friends. Oh, another thing. You have the new Democrat coalition, which is essentially a caucus of centrist Democrats in the House of Representatives, who wrote a piece for CNBC on April 6, 2022, where they argue that a bipartisan innovation bill is what is needed to fight inflation. And Biden recently also promoted, a few days ago, this bipartisan innovation bill as a means of fighting inflation. And in this article, these two Democratic representatives, it's going to be Representative Jim Hines and Representative Mike Shirley, I hope I'm saying that right, from Connecticut and New Jersey, respectively, they both argued that we need in America to have our own microchip production to offset the harms that come from importing our microchips from foreign countries where our adversaries can potentially seize them. Now, what they say in the fine print here is that private industry has already began to produce microchips here at home, independent of government intervention, but we need to invest in their efforts. Basically, we need to subsidize corporations so that we can ensure that they can continue to do so in a manner that is most efficient. Well, there are a few things about this. Number one, if you are admitting that private industry is already doing the job that your party thinks the government needs to do by default, that is indicated in your economic principles, then are you not by omission saying the way that you generally govern when times are good is not a way that is sustainable or not a way that conforms to the nature of these topics? The nature of economics, my friends, is not one of a centralized authority dictating certain things to happen in the marketplace. The nature of economics is one of individuals coming together, deciding what is valuable to them, and then implementing that value through market mechanisms, and that's how economics is meant to function. But throughout history, you've had dictators, you've had authoritarians, you've had do-gooders inject themselves into the place of the individual, uproot the interpersonal nature of economics, and try to saturate the market with their own desires. And what happens almost every time that happens? Well, it just happened with COVID, when the government, in many places, forcibly shut down businesses from operating. And of course, this caused supply chain problems, this caused worker shortages, this caused a lot of issues. Then if the governments of several states around the country simply would have allowed businesses to operate in accordance to what they thought was best for themselves. If the government had simply embraced a laissez-faire attitude during COVID, perhaps we wouldn't have as many problems as we do right now. We would have had some, most certainly, because an infectious pandemic is going to impact some people in the workforce, most certainly. But when you have government forcibly shutting people down and then fining businesses for staying open in spite of their orders, you're going to have serious economic problems. So back to this. They're recognizing, by wanting to invest in private industry that's already doing their job, that private industry is ahead of the curve in the government. So you have Joe Biden wanting to get rid of an EPA regulation. You have Chris Kelly of Arizona wanting to go ahead and have a gas tax holiday, where an immoral government imposition called the gas tax is not causing firms to economize and increase the price for consumers. And then you have these two Democrats right here talking about investing in private industry, even though private industry is already all the way ahead of the curve on them. My friends, the absence of one thing does not imply the benevolence of another. Just because the Democrats are refusing to do government intervention in this case does not necessarily, or I guess in the last case they are, but in the previous two cases they're not, does not mean that laissez-faire economics is inherently justified. But what it most certainly does mean is that there is some merit to laissez-faire economics. And we needn't look at the Democrats' unwillingness to be interventionist for a very select few items to see the value of a laissez-faire attitude. The laissez-faire attitude simply says on a philosophical level that when you have the government, which is essentially force, coercive force, involved in interpersonal relationships, those relationships do not flow as well as they did if the government were not involved in them. Because two people or three people or four people that are getting together, trading ideas, trading values, are going to understand that transaction much more than if the government comes in and imposes a burden upon them. They're going to understand the transaction, they're going to be able to execute it than if the government comes in and imposes a burden upon them. Because in any case, whether that transaction was already doomed to fail or not before the government comes in, when the government comes in, the transaction is most certainly doomed to either take a different form than was intended, and thus to deviate from its original purpose, to violate its first principles, or to fail. The Democrats are retreating away, in a select few cases, from their fundamental economic philosophy. That does not suggest long-standing viability of their ideas. But here's another one. Not only is the Democratic Party doomed because they are retreating from their economic philosophy because it's not tenable when the rubber really hits the road, they're also doomed because now they are going up against many of the parents of America. What do I mean? This seems like a hyperbolic statement, but it's not. My friends, after Governor Ron DeSantis signed the Parental Rights and Education Bill, which has been slanderously dubbed the Don't Say Gay Bill, once it was reintroduced, the Florida Democrats essentially went into a fervor and created a video of a compilation of people saying the word gay. And they created this narrative that the bill was inherently trying to illegalize and delegitimize gay people. In all reality, the bill was not supposed to do that at all. People have talked about this ad nauseum. It's not my duty to talk about it anymore than folks have. I hate repeating what other folks have repeated because I can't add anything to it. But what I can say is this. Once it was signed, you had Democrats in several other states reacting negatively to it, and you also had uncovered state initiatives from Democrats that were typically passed a few years before this became a thing, but are now receiving criticism because the issue of education is in the spotlight. And such a case happened in New Jersey, where the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, was forced to subject the educational standards that his government championed in 2020 to review right now in 2022, because those educational standards included teaching kids from pre-K to fifth grade about gender expression, gender identity, and things of that sort. Things that are fundamentally subjective and indicative of an ideological position, rather than they are indicative about the nature of certain topics that children need to learn to be healthy and productive citizens in their own lives, which is what education is meant to do. Education, as the class has understood it, is meant to make the man, to mold the man. It is not meant to be a tool to shape a mind in accordance to your own ideological whims. Education is meant to teach the different aspects of objective reality, whether that be mathematics or science or the ability to read and write and these things that allow us to interface with reality in a rich way, and things that down the road unlock our own gifts. Because again, I believe everyone on this earth has a gift, has a unique purpose. And these things down the road unlock our own gifts and allow us in the process of maturation to implement them as we go on through life. But no. Phil Murphy had the idea to have gender ideology taught in classrooms. And this is not just Phil Murphy. This is also Maryland, whose health education standards, according to the Maryland State Board of Education, also include basically a mirror of New Jersey's, teaching kids about gender identity and gender expression when they're in the most vulnerable state. The reason the Democrats are doomed is because, number one, Murphy having to renege on that, it means he recognizes just how sensitive this issue is. Most people don't care about politics in the United States. Most Americans are apolitical, but an increasing amount of Americans are becoming non-apolitical because their children are now at stake, or because they feel like their children are now at stake. And so in this instance, the Democrats are now alienating a previously untapped electoral base who are coming into the fold and who are now saying, leave my children alone, don't teach them your subjective musings, allow them to understand objective reality as it is and not as you want them to understand it. And Murphy reneging on his state standards and saying that, and he said in this statement, that every state education standard that is not appropriate for kids needs to be revised. After he quite literally, shepherded previous state education standards that are not age appropriate for kids through the legislature and ensure that they would be put into education. This double-mindedness, this sort of cognitive dissonance, reflects a deep unsettledness with their own policies. So the Democrats are now in a very precarious position where they have to go ahead and defend things that are going to not only alienate a lot of people, but fundamentally assault the ignorance and innocence of a group of people who are meant to be innocent and in a sense are meant to be ignorant of some things in the world. The Democratic Party is not in trouble because of an election. The Democratic Party is in trouble because they can't even stick to their own principles. They can't even commit to their own principles. They can't even affirm the battles that they have put themselves in by virtue of going leftward. The Congressional Democratic Caucus, whatever it's called, is the the biggest congressional caucus in the House Democratic Party, in the House of Representatives. And they are driving the narrative. And yet Democrats across the nation are beginning to see, or will begin to see, just how untenable a lot of these ideas are, just how untenable regulating away a firm's ability to correct and economize its own resources is, just how untenable and pushing a progressive policy education upon kids who don't have the faculties developed to fight it is, just how untenable it is. And it's not simply untenable because it's unpopular. It's untenable because it's immoral. It's untenable because it goes against what is right, and it goes against and it fights actually for what is wrong. It is untenable because there are objective truths in this world that cannot be trespassed by any political party, and if they are, disaster unfolds. I'm not concerned about the midterm elections for the Democrats. I'm concerned about what's going to happen when their ideas in other sectors, because I've only identified two areas. I've identified inflation, I've identified education. When their ideas in other sectors begin to fall apart and unravel, that's what I'm worried about. And I predict that as time persists, those ideas will not stand the test of time because those ideas are not truthful. This is not to say that the Republicans' ideas are truthful. That's not to say that at all. The Republican Party has plenty of ideas that are untruthful and wrong. Having said that, the Republican Party is not trying to teach kids gender identity. The Republican Party is, by and large, not trying to handicap businesses with environmental regulations and with gas taxes. That's the Democrats. And in this case, they're in deep trouble because those ideas are not viable in this context or in any other in this universe. Think on it. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, please, patreon.com/AbdulCWatson, support this operation, or go to my locals, christianwatson.logos.com, or you can please go to my Discord, which is in the comment section down below. Please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel, and share this video. This message is dynamite. We need to get people thinking more pensively about these things, because if we don't, we risk losing the intellectual foundations that we need to defend the spirit of freedom in this country. So my friends, I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.